Hi, and welcome back to Mary Trump Live. I'm Brian Karam, sitting in for Mary today. Thanks again for having me. Let's ask a question. Ready? What do you do when you combine the mentality of a spoiled toddler with the power of the presidency or a king? Well, you probably look a lot like Donnie Trump, who today told Norway that one of the reasons he's probably going to give up on peace with Greenland is because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. Also speaks of his commitment, I guess, as in if, he needs to be committed quickly. And if that's not all, there's Stephen Miller, who screams for everyone in Minnesota to sit down, though it's clear the federal government is intent on investigating everyone involved in Minnesota and the shooting of an unarmed, innocent woman, except, of course, the person who did it. Okay, come on, let's dive in. Yeah, you guessed it. Mother Jones reports that today the Trump regime is refusing to open an FBI investigation into the killing of Renee Good by ICE agent Jonathan Ross in Minneapolis. They're doing this despite widespread video evidence refuting claims that the officer fired in self-defense. The Trump regime accused Good of domestic terrorism, a narrative undermined by analysis from the New York Times and Bellingcat. Both outlets found no evidence that Ross was run over or had internal bleeding. That's the other one they're claiming. Instead, footage showed that he placed himself in danger near Good's vehicle. Now, while declining to investigate Ross, the DOJ has reportedly targeted Good's widow. They're also launching probes into Minnesota officials Tim Walz and Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, and the governor of Minnesota, accusing them of obstructing immigration enforcement. Anyway, federal authorities have blocked state investigators from participating, prompting resignations by multiple federal prosecutors in Minnesota. I would say they're chicken, but let's be blunt. Trump is making this about politics, and it's actually because they don't want to handle the fact that it's about facts and procedure. Walz had nothing to do with it. Frey had nothing to do with it. The ICE officer who was involved, Ross, clearly avoided existing police procedures. I worked for America's Most Wanted for 5 years. I've covered crime for 40. As a former police chief told me, you don't create, your goal is to de-escalate. You don't create the circumstances by which you have to justify use of lethal force. And that's what he did. And let's talk about, could he have avoided it? There's a couple of simple facts to look at. One, he walked around the car, twice, and took videotape of the car that Good was in. Guess what? He had her license plate number? He could have easily found her later. You avoid firing guns in a crowded area. It was clearly crowded. But the clearest, most concise affirmation of the fact that they avoided normal police procedure. In every police shooting I've covered, and I counted them up, I've covered more than 36 of them. Every time a police officer is involved in a shooting, they put their gun, they hand it to their partner, they sit and they wait for investigators to come and clear him, and they are always taken off duty with administrative leave with pay until, such time as the investigation is completed. None of that happened in this case. The officer fled the scene with his gun. There is no investigation. And the vice president told us on Friday, while he was in the briefing room, that while there was an investigation, they'd already come to a conclusion that he was not guilty and that Good was a domestic terrorist. So here's what Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said about this issue in an appearance on Fox News.
What happened on that day has been reviewed by millions and millions of Americans because it was recorded on phones when it happened. Okay, the Department of Justice, our civil rights unit, we don't just go out and investigate every time an officer is forced to defend himself against somebody or putting his life in danger. We never do. That has nothing to do with what happened in Minneapolis. There are over 1,000 shootings every year where law enforcement are put in danger by individuals, and they have to protect themselves, and they have a lawful right to do so. The Department of Justice doesn't just stand up and investigate because some congressman thinks we should, because some governor thinks that we should. We investigate when it's appropriate to investigate, and that is not the case here. It wasn't the case when it happened, and it's not the case today. If circumstances change, and there's something that we do need to investigate around that shooting or any other shooting, we will. But we are not going to bow to pressure from the media, bow to pressure from politicians, and do something that we never do. Not under this administration, not under the last administration. And so, no, we are not investigating. And if there comes a time when we need to, we will, but it's not now.
Okay, that's an out-and-out lie. I mean, there's no greater, that entire statement is a lie. They always investigate if a congressperson or a member of the Senate or the police or someone asks them to. That's why they're there. That's A. B, so if they're not going to investigate and they won't allow the state or local authorities to investigate, who's investigating it? Because I have never covered a police-involved shooting in 40 years that wasn't investigated. That is an anathema to the process of law. That is anti-constitution. It's anti-democracy. It's anti-American. And in fact, it's the act of a criminal covering up a crime. That's what's occurring here. Lies and criminals covering for each other. I could almost see Donald Trump making this statement. Anyway, thanks to recent reporting, we now know that the criminal Donald's desire to take over Greenland is related to his being passed over. You can't even make this stuff up. It's like a Saturday Night Live skit. Being passed over for the Nobel Peace Prize. Donald recently sent a message to, and I'm going to screw this name up, Jonas Gahr Støre, the Prime Minister of Norway. It has since been leaked to the press. The message said in part, quote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, yeesh, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America." Well, what's good and proper for the United States of America is peace. We don't start wars. Number 2, I'm so glad that your commitment to peace, Donald, is so blatantly transparent that if you don't get what you want, you're going to be violent. I'm reminded of the old Isaac Asimov statement, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Donald Trump is taking the last refuge, and he is certainly incompetent. This came after Støre and Finnish President Alexander Stubb sent a message to the Trump regime urging them to de-escalate tensions with Greenland. Well, good luck there. European leaders have warned that Donald's rhetoric threatens NATO unity. Yes, of course it does. Donald has also threatened to impose new tariffs on European countries that do not support his Greenland plan. The European Union is preparing to retaliate. This includes slapping tariffs on about $108 billion on U.S. imports. And for the first time, the EU is considering using its anti-coercion instrument to restrict U.S. access to European markets. Okay, let me respond to a couple of things here. First of all, Donald Trump isn't getting what he wants, right? So in addition to slapping tariffs on our European allies, a Europe that we helped build after World War II, the Marshall Plan rebuilt all of Europe. We built NATO. We built the EU. We built our allies to thwart what? Russian hegemony when they were the Soviet Union. Now it's just Russian hegemony. And by God, if we bow now, who benefits? There's a guy right now in the Kremlin, Vlad the Impaler Putin, who's cheering this on, wanting to see NATO fall. But folks, the stupidity is even deeper than that. If he doesn't get what he wants, he's going to slap tariffs on European products. Tariffs are deferred taxes. Who pays them? The American public. So if you don't give me Greenland, I'm going to make people in the United States pay more for your products. How is that a threat? Somebody please explain to me how it does anyone any good except those who sit in the Kremlin. It's certainly not going to help out the United States. And for those who say they've got it coming, they've got what coming? There are 57,000 people living in a land that is twice the size of Texas. And we have an existing treaty with them, which allows us to do anything that we want there, pretty much. And I spoke to a retired lieutenant colonel earlier this week for my podcast, where he served in Denmark. And he said, listen, they want us to be there. It helps their economy. It helps defense. They breathe, easier when we're there. But Donald Trump wants total control. And why? Rare earths, among other things. And of course, Peter Thiel wants to rebuild Western civilization there, but that's another story. Donald has unveiled plans for a board of peace. This body's supposed purpose is to gather international leaders to help oversee peace in Gaza. Of course, there's a catch. To secure permanent membership to the group, wait for it, it's coming. Leaders must pay $1 billion. Donald has invited leaders from around the world to join the board, and Reuters reports that, according to the Kremlin, Donald has invited who? Russian President Vlad the Impaler Putin to be part of the board. That's the same Vladimir Putin, by the way, who in 2022 invaded Ukraine and has been engaged in, no, let's correct that. He invaded Ukraine in 2014, right? The Crimea was invaded in 2014. He's been at war in Ukraine for almost 12 years. So now it's time for an emotional support moment. Before we sign off, here are a few quiet winter scenes. Snow falling, trees standing still, the world slowing. I don't know about anybody else, but I love the sound of the stillness when the snow falls and there's no wind. It just makes you feel the world is at peace. Enjoy a few moments of calm before the next day begins. And as Mary is fond of saying with Donald, things don't get worse. They just constantly get worse. So have fun with the emotional support moment. And no, that's not Greenland, although, if Greenland is as peaceful as that and looks as beautiful as that, but there's a lot more ice there. With that, we'll take your questions. What do we got? Laura M. H1Q, you became a YouTube member. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. March, I'm going to screw this up. March Rotor 6083 elbows from Canada, and the gloves are off up here. Well, the gloves are off everywhere. I appreciate that. Elizabeth Rowe 5960 donated $5. Question: hello again, Brian. What's your opinion as a journalist over the brouhaha about Don Lemon at the church yesterday? Yes, I heard about that. I will judge no one. I will simply say that I find myself a reporter, not an activist. My job is to report vetted facts. I will give you my opinions labeled as such. I will not create those type of environments that could lead to the type of stuff that happened yesterday, but I will not. It is not for me to judge. But as a journalist, I will only say I'm not sure that's the work of a journalist. It's the work of an activist. And while activists are wonderful, and I applaud all the activism, particularly against the Donald Trump regime, as a reporter, I would not engage in that type of behavior. That's me. Free your mind. No, I love that. And I love the little picture there. The mayor is being investigated. The governor is being investigated. Of course, this is in Minnesota. Her wife is being investigated. The only one who's not being investigated is Jonathan Ross. You are correct. And the fact of the matter is, he's the one who pulled the trigger, and he's the one who definitely should be investigated. This was a crime. It was a ginned up. And as I said, this particular situation angers me more than any other I've covered recently, because as a reporter, I can tell you categorically, no one gets off without an investigation. And they are particularly cumbersome investigations when law enforcement takes and has to use a handgun. Why? Because if you don't, then it's free range. We're just merely cannon fodder for anybody kook with a gun and a badge. And that is why, my friends, that Jonathan Ross, and I'm not saying he's guilty, I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying he's innocent until proven guilty, and an investigation should be taking place, because he's the one who pulled the trigger, and he is the reason why Good is dead. And he did not follow, even according to and look it up, even according to their own procedures of ICE, and every policing entity I've ever covered followed none of the procedures. He looked more like a paramilitary outfit on the hunt for potential enemies. And the American public is not the enemy of law enforcement. Law enforcement is there to protect and serve, and they are taught to de-escalate situations. And so are military personnel in those situations, which is why you have the Posse Comitatus Act, so that you do not use the military in policing efforts, because it's essentially two different incongruent missions. And this was not a mission of peacekeeping. This was a mission of seek and destroy. Thank you. Free your mind. Timothy 2:25. Can't wrap my mind around this coward as a president, our president. Imagine being in the briefing room with this idiot every day. And by the way, having to walk into a briefing room where if you ask a decent question, you're told you are a left-wing nut and that you shouldn't be there. The fact of the matter is, this is without a doubt, and I've covered every president since Reagan, this is the worst administration I've ever covered on strictly, and I'm not talking politically. There are some things that people will agree that he should do politically. It's how he's done them that, are ineffective and dangerous. But as far as unnecessarily endangering American lives, I've never seen a president more cavalier and more dangerous in my lifetime. And I remind everyone to go watch The Day After, because that's what we are really looking at. There's a guy with one finger who can push one button, and pretty soon we're all living out of caves if we don't die of radiation poisoning. Nuclear winter is a reality I do not want to face. And that's what Donald Trump, that's where he's taking us. Thank you, Timothy. Evil is as evil does. Yeah, well, you said a mouthful there. Incompetence is as incompetence does. You have a guy with horrible daddy issues, and every other person in the United States, male with horrible daddy issues, is certainly engaged in the behavior that is threatening all of us. Blanche, you liar. Are we talking Golden Girls? Let's. My wife loves Blanche. Anyway, I know what you're talking about. Yes, you are correct. Brian, isn't it true that if someone is trying to kidnap you and you are to do everything for them not to go with them, because that is when you are in harm's way? Yes, Heather, you're correct. That's one thing that you're taught, that they teach you stranger danger. Again, I worked at America's Most Wanted for years. I guess if you're relating it to the events that happened in Minneapolis, and if Good was afraid she would be kidnapped, you are correct. That was where one of the that's a stratagem, and that was a tactic that was wrong by the police department, by the ICE agent. You are taught never to reach your hand into a car, never try to open the door. You don't know. And police will tell you there are two incidents that are key and prime for danger and for violence. One is going, if you've got a domestic disturbance that can turn again. You could have a husband and a wife fighting, and one of them, they may be fighting each other. You turn up, they'll show up and turn on you. That's the most dangerous. The second most dangerous is a traffic stop, which is what this was. They teach you never to do that in a traffic stop. It's frightening to me that the police procedures that are in place and are taught to police officers were not followed in this case, and this man will not be investigated for it. This is wholly without substance. It is wholly the worst I've ever seen. Deborah Miller, 1214. The sickest part is Donald might be starting a war to evade Epstein files. With Donald, it's more than one thing can be true. I'm sure he certainly doesn't like to be involved with the Epstein files because, remember when a reporter on Air Force One asked him about it pointedly, he called her a piggy. When I asked him about him, he flipped me off in the first administration and denied that he even knew Epstein. And when I asked him if he was delusional, he got nuts about that. But Donald Trump is delusional. That's true. But part of this is also because Donald Trump wants to be the boss of he has abandoned democracy and believes that the United States, China, and Russia should divide up the world. And that's what our allies in Europe are most afraid of. And I've listened lately to the president of France, the president of Germany, as they accuse him of being a robber, a robber baron, and a den robber. So Donald Trump is not trusted anywhere across the world. And there are many things besides the Epstein files that play into this. But of course, anything that keeps you talking, anything that keeps you from talking about the Epstein files, Donald Trump's in for it. Free your mind again. This administration thinks the more you repeat it, and I love the dog picture, by the way, the more you repeat a lie, then it becomes true. And unfortunately, it does work for MAGA. It doesn't work as well as it used to. And as much as he repeats a lie, the problem is the press doesn't counter it. We don't counter it. And I'm sorry. And when a reporter asked Caroline Leavitt last week, the PEP secretary in the briefing room about Greenland, and she went off on him, not one reporter stood up for that reporter, and not one reporter pushed back. There have been many times in the past when I've been in that briefing room and we'll ask a question. We don't get the answer we want. They repeat a lie. Then someone else says, wait a minute. And I've talked to many press secretaries, including the one, Mike McCurry comes to mind, and Joe Lockhart, who told me, Brian, when you guys started asking me the same question, I knew I was in the crosshairs, and I'd look for someone to ask, to pick for a different question who I could rely upon to ask me an easier question. The fact of the matter is we're not doing our job, so it's easier for them to repeat the lies. Every administration wants to put its best foot forward. It is our job as reporters to stand in that room and hold truth to power. And we're definitely not doing it. This is the worst White House press corps I've ever seen in the briefing room, bar none. Andrea Cohen, 1728. He's getting rid of NATO to make Putin happy, and his board of peace will have Putin on it. Yes, these are all facts. I find nothing I can disagree with you there on. And it's obvious that he's trying to make Putin happy. He sat there and blamed Ukraine for the war that started in 2014, that was started 12 years ago by Putin, who thought he could go and remember Zelensky in the Oval Office on those horrible gold chairs when J.D. Vance acted like an idiot and said he didn't say thank you enough when he had said thank you 3 times in the meeting, and came out and said that, we tried peace with him. He doesn't want it. And Donald Trump said, this is your fault. No, it's not Zelensky's fault. He got invaded. Donald Trump is always trying to make Putin happy. As a patriotic American, Paul Gustafson, E5M, as a patriotic American, I would like to extend a profound apology to the rest of the world. You don't owe us, owe the rest of the world, Paul, an apology. Those who voted for Donald Trump do. Those who didn't vote most definitely do. And Donald Trump will never apologize for anything because he comes from the Roy Cohn school of deny, deny, deflect, deny, 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 and you win. But for the rest of us, make sure that you vote in the 2026 midterm elections. More importantly, volunteer to work at your local precinct. More importantly, make sure that young people and old people vote. More importantly, make sure you help out. This is going to take the efforts of every single one of us to thwart the energy of the super minority. It's going to take a true majority of Americans to come forward and help. Trust the dog too. I've always been a things are hard, but my country always lands on its feet optimist. I don't believe that now. It's very frightening. I still believe it. And trust the dog too. I got to tell you, the reason why I still believe it is because I have children, and more importantly, I have grandchildren, and I want a world that they can live in. So I still have hope. It is frightening, but they only win when you give up. And so don't give up. What was the line in Galaxy Quest? Never give up, never surrender. And, you know, the rest you must, but just don't quit. If you've ever, I love that poem, by the way, Don't Quit, read it. That's how I feel about the situation. Free your mind one again. Question: Donald is destroying this country, destroying our alliances with our allies. When will Congress remove him, either impeach or the 25th Amendment? Do you think they'll do either? No. I think that the 25th Amendment is only if he goes, you know, face down in his morning cereal and starts gurgling and babbling like a cicada, and they can't pump him up with enough Adderall to get out and speak, you know, coherently for a half hour. Maybe. But they're all complicit with him, and they all know they're going to jail if something happens to the Donald. As far as Congress removing him in the impeachment process, he's not going to get impeached before the midterms. And he will only be impeached after the midterms if they have the votes to convict him. So the question remains, do they or don't they? I can't predict that. But I will tell you that if they bring forward impeachment charges against Donald Trump following the 2026 midterm elections, they have whipped the votes, and they do believe they have enough to vote him out and convict him. Otherwise, the only other hope of getting rid of this guy is if he goes, you know, chokes on a hamburger sometime before the end of his, and anything's possible. Donald Trump is not in good physical shape. And I'm not in the same physical shape I was 10 years ago when he first came on the scene, but I hope I have a few more years. No, I'm kidding. But that could happen to him too. There are 3 ways to remove him before the end of his term. I think the most likely is that he expires in office before there's any official action taken on the behalf of the American people. And I hope I'm wrong. Thanks for your mind. Paul, Trump and Miller inseparable. Well, they will be inseparable once one of them goes to prison and the other one doesn't. Thanks, Paul. Scorpion 711, I heard 73% of Canada has quit using U.S. products. Well, I don't know if 73% of Canada has quit using U.S. products, but I will tell you that my favorite distillery in Kentucky has closed down for a year because they no longer can sell Kentucky bourbon to Canada and Europe because of the tariffs and Donald Trump. So, yes, there is a consequence to the tariffs. Yes, there is a consequence to Donald Trump's insanity. And yes, we're all suffering for it. Thanks, Scorpion 711. Trust the dog too. When are our you're shouting. When are our representatives going to say enough? Well, as long as they keep getting, look, let me ask you point blank this question, Trust the dog, to consider. You're dealing with a Congress who broke without giving the American public at large affordable health care. Meanwhile, many of them get free health care for life. So when do you think they're going to say enough is enough? As long as they're getting theirs, they are a part of the problem. Donald Trump isn't the cause. He's the symptom, and so are the members of Congress. Team World 4802, hello from Denmark. Yes, what your guest is saying is absolutely correct. Why, thank you from Denmark. Having visited there, I love Denmark and despise people who do not love peace as much as they do, and education. Think of it this way. If you live in Greenland, why would you want to trade free health care, better education, and a better standard of living for what Donald Trump can give you? Thanks, Team World. In Tall Pines, we've lost a freedom of speech for God. We've lost our freedom of speech, for God's sakes. There are currently 4 large corporations that own 95% of what you see, read, or hear in American media. There are vast news deserts in the United States where there is no local media. It's not that we've lost free speech. It's that the freaking government stole it. And they have done so complicit with large media corporations since the Pentagon Papers and Watergate. What was supposed to be the birth of great journalism and the culmination of great journalism in our country was actually the beginning of the end of great journalism, because of the fact that the government saw that they had to control as much as possible the output of news so that they could go on grifting us. And Donald Trump is, again, a symptom of what occurred with Roger Ailes, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan, and every single president of the United States. Democrat, Republican, congressional leaders are all complicit in this with the large companies who donate millions of dollars to their reelection efforts. I have called for, in a book that I wrote called Free the Press, to break up media monopolies. And Joe Biden, though he talked about busting up monopolies right and left, would not take up that cause. Why? The same reason that the Freedom Act, the Press Act in Congress has failed 3 times. Jamie Raskin has tried to give reporters the right to keep confidential sources, and it dies because those in the Senate who support the free press are in a minority. Those who support the oligarchs are in a majority. That's why we lost our free speech. It was stolen. Thank you, in Tall Pines. Paul Gustafson, $5. Thank you for the 5. Your comments on DOJ investigation and frame Waltz as an alternative pretext to invoking the Insurrection Act. Of course, it's things with Donald Trump align for his benefit and his cause. He wants to invoke the Insurrection Act. He would love to instigate and invoke martial law prior to the midterm elections. We'll have the elections, but in blue states, he's going to be supremely vigilant in affecting voter suppression. And this is a method by which you do it. Now, is it on purpose? Hell, I can't say. I'm not in his mind. But I can tell you that it certainly aligns with any interest he would have in suppressing the vote. Draw your own conclusions from that. Gene Hodgson, question, Brian, I heard from a reliable source that Renee didn't bump into him. Ross slipped on the ice and held onto the car without falling underneath it. Hell, you can look at the videotape and see that. It doesn't matter if... Here's the thing. It doesn't matter if she did bump into him. What matters is that they, the ICE patrol, the ICE paramilitary, the ICE police, the ICE, whatever you want to call them, they instigated this incident by which they then had to justify their violence. That's what I can't get people to understand. It doesn't matter in that moment. There's milliseconds where you have to decide, do I defend myself? Did he make a wrong decision? He made plenty. They didn't follow proper police procedure established to avoid these events. That's what happened. That's why we had what happened happen. We can dissect it all we want, and that would happen in a court of law. I've covered enough of these cases in a court of law where, you look at a videotape or you interview a witness and each one comes away with a different idea of what happened. Hell, different videotapes show different things. Different people will testify differently. Objectivity is subjective. So I'm sorry. It doesn't matter if she bumped into him. Hell, to me, it doesn't even matter if she lurched into him. They did not follow proper police procedures to make sure that this did not happen. And they had every opportunity to avoid this situation. He may have felt totally justified in his mind in firing a weapon 3 times on an unarmed soccer mom who was simply trying to flee because she was scared. He may have justified that in his mind, and I can't convince you otherwise or him otherwise. What I can tell you is that due to police procedure, that should have never been the case. Thanks, Gene. SFL 6. Michael Cohen no longer partners with MTN Midas Touch. Lever Members YouTube channel has all updated info on Michael Cohen looking for a pardon from Trump by throwing Letitia James under the bus. Well, that's a good question for Michael. You know, I have a documentary coming out that Michael Cohen is a part of. I interviewed him and asked him, would he go back to Donald Trump? And he said he definitely deserves an explanation for what happened to him. I know he would love to have a pardon. I don't know if he'd go back to work for Donald Trump. And I as far as throwing Letitia James under the bus, you'll have to ask Michael about it. But I got to tell you, it certainly is a very interesting. Everything with Donald is always like this. Everything. And Michael Cohen was part of that world for many years, many years. Susan Thompson, $10. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I don't see an elephant. This president is in obvious serious cognitive decline. Seriously, we're in 25th Amendment territory. Susan, I don't disagree with you. I just have no way to look. I covered the first Trump administration, and I'm covering this one. He's obviously different now. If you watch the his Christmas message to the United States where he screamed at us for 18 to 21 minutes, doesn't make sense. If you see his listless attitude, if you watch the fact that he, the cankles, the swollen arms, the patches on his back of his hand, the fact that he sits most of the time when he has people into the Oval or elsewhere instead of standing. He doesn't do his rallies anymore. He's good for 25 minutes standing up when he's pumped full of Adderall, I guess. I don't know. He's obviously suffering from something. I would say it's a cognitive decline, but I'm not a doctor. You aren't going to see the 25th Amendment take place as long as those complicit in his duplicity remain in office and they have something to gain. And Stephen Miller will never support it because he knows that he's probably out the door if J.D. Vance is in there and probably headed for a long stint in prison, which he deserves. So I don't know that while in any normal instance, you would think this is 25th Amendment territory. But I have to remind you, Susan, that this is Donald Trump and this isn't normal. In the middle of nowhere, $10. I glad to see you, Brian. As an old white woman whose father and mom both fought for justice since the 60s, I'm angry, devastated, and terrified for our future. What can we do to stop this? I feel helpless. Don't feel helpless. They want you to feel helpless. And I think I told you last time I was here, I love in the middle of nowhere because that's what my grandson tells me whenever we take a drive. He looks at me and he goes, Paul, are we in the middle of nowhere? And we could be in a neighborhood or in a park, but to him, we're in the middle of nowhere. But I'll tell you this. My parents, my grandparents, hell, I think I was a baby when I marched with Martin Luther King. You cannot give up hope. You cannot give up your energy. You cannot give in to the hate. I still believe all we are saying is give peace a chance. I still believe that a sense of humor will get you through this because that's the one thing, they love it if you flick the beard and get angry with them. What they can't handle is a sense of humor and you making fun of them. Why do you think Donald Trump hates comics and wants to get rid of Saturday Night Live? It's nuts. Don't give up hope. What can you do to stop this? Please vote. Please get involved. Please make sure you help others. Make sure the young people get to vote. Talk to young people. I've talked to so many young people who say, I'd rather have a fascist or a communist without knowing what the hell it is they're saying. This is as designed during the Enlightenment. Our Constitution still stands to this day as one of the most beautiful pieces of legislation, literature, ideas ideals of a government ever espoused by man. We've never lived up to those ideals. That doesn't mean we give up on them. It means we fight that much harder for them. This is our time to shine. Make sure that we stand up for what's right. Thank you in the middle of nowhere. I'll take a couple of more and then I got to take off. Mary Trump is right about this dangerous monster. Yes, Mary knows him better than anybody. As I said, I listened when she said there's no worst with Donald. It's only worse every day. I heard that and I know it. And she's right. Will you like being hungry because the agricultural workers are gone? Just a question. I don't like being hungry at all. I don't understand the question. Why would anybody like being hungry? And I don't know where to go with that, Keith. But I'll just say the question is no. And the agriculture workers aren't the only ones to worry. In the middle of nowhere, gifted one Mary Trump Media membership. Thank you. In the middle of nowhere, we got time for one more before I got to take off. What do we got? Any thoughts on Gavin Newsom's interview with Ben Shapiro? Why does he continue to speak out of both sides of his ass? Well, he's a politician, right? There's your answer there, DPD 5844. But I think Gavin Newsom is trying to appeal to and speak. Now, Ben Shapiro is a moron, but I think Gavin Newsom's strategy is to appeal to both sides of the fence and maybe get some Trumpers to come over to the Democratic side. Agree with it or disagree with it, that's on you. But I understand the strategy in this case. Those people in the Democratic Party who've said kick out the moderates, that only ensures Donald Trump wins an election. Those people who say, that it's got to be, woke or broke or woke is broke. Hell, I don't know. All I can tell you is that you've got to appeal to the people who are on the fence, and you've got to appeal to some of those, give those voters who voted for Donald Trump and now have doubts, give them some place to go. I think that's what Gavin's trying to appeal to. And with that said, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Mary will be back. Again, you can check me out, buy her merch, ring the bell, have fun. Thanks, guys, for being here. You can catch me at Just Ask the Question on Substack or my weekly column in Salon on Fridays. I want to thank everyone for having me. It's always a joy to be here. I love you guys so much. It's always good to take your questions, and it's always good to have the conversation. Peace and love, and vote. Catch you next time.